The Champions Classic was tonight, Joe, at least the first game so far. That means after that, we get the next round of the college football playoff rankings. And we have a shakeup this week for sure. We'll dive into that first. We have week 13 already, the week before rivalry week. Hard to believe this season's already come and gone as quick as it has, but a couple shakeups last week with some upsets. Obviously, we have Oklahoma knocking off Alabama, the big one. Georgia takes care of Texas, pretty much almost eliminates Texas. We'll see if some chaos happens down the stretch, and Texas could maybe still slide their way in. But we had definitely some craziness last week, a few upsets. Louisville goes down on Friday night to Clemson, pretty much ending their chance as well. But then that sets us up for some big-time matchups this week. USC and Oregon we'll touch on. Pretty much a elimination game, I think, for both teams. If Oregon were to lose that one, I would have a hard time seeing them make the playoff. Utah and Kansas State we'll talk about. Can Utah just stack another win as they've climbed their way to 12? Tulane now is your G5 representative. So a handful of things to talk about this week, Joe. But welcome back, and how are we?
I'm great, Beef, as always. I mean, another great week of college football is upon us. We only have 2 full weeks left. Then it's conference title weekend. Then we got the Army-Navy game. And then we're looking at the playoff, which is crazy how, quick this season's gone by. We say it a million times. I won't keep harping on that. But definite shakeup in the rankings, as you said. And one thing that bothers me now that they're doing, though, they keep showing Miami at that 11 spot. But then they have to keep explaining, well, Miami's probably not going to go to the conference championship game. So just put Georgia Tech there for now. Yeah. They're like, Miami is most likely, unless Georgia Tech were to lose, or Virginia were to lose to Virginia Tech at the end of the season. Right now, they're not in the conference title game. So put the highest ranked conference champ like Georgia Tech in there. But these rankings to me are kind of interesting because you're really starting to see a hard cutoff line in terms of like at-large bids. Most likely, when you look at the top 25, of course, my computer is loading in now. Like BYU, Utah, I know you have Miami there as well. But really, after Miami, you're probably not getting an at-large bid. And even Miami, might not get an at-large bid if, all these teams win out, which is unlikely. I feel like we'll get at least one upset just because that's how college football works. But, you're looking right now at that number 13. I'll even give you, because Vandy, really, their last big game left is Tennessee, who's 20th. They would need chaos. Even USC, I know they play Oregon this week. But even if USC were to win, I don't see them jumping 5 teams to get in that spot. You know what I mean? Especially BYU. If they end up going 11-1 in the regular season, I know we're going to talk about BYU in a little bit. It's going to be tough if you're one of those teams behind BYU, especially Utah, who lost head-to-head to them, even though I think Utah, if they played at Utah or on a neutral field, would win that game. You did lose to BYU head-to-head. It's tough, it's going to be tough for those teams behind BYU to really jump them and sneak into that at-large spot in playoff.
What are the conference, or at least in the Big Ten? I know every conference might have some different rules, but what are the tiebreaker rules? Just because, hypothetically speaking, if Ohio State does lose to Michigan and Michigan wins out, would Michigan go to the Big Ten title game and Ohio State stays home?
Let me pull up the standings.
Because Michigan's 6-1, Oregon 6-1, USC 6-1. Then you have 7-0 Ohio State, 8-0 Indiana. So USC and Oregon play each other this week. The loser of that one will be eliminated from going to the Big Ten title game. And then you got Michigan with only 1 loss, and I don't know who they play this week, or they might be off this week. Yeah, this week they play at Maryland. You would assume they win that game. Maryland started out the season pretty well. It's really fell apart, but Oregon is ahead of them right now, but I don't know exactly what the tiebreaker is. I assume just overall record, but that doesn't really impact this. Because Duke last week was still alive, and they had 4 losses.
Yeah, I think it would go to head to head. So I think Michigan would need Oregon to win because then you get USC out of there. Then it becomes Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan. Michigan would have the head-to-head over Ohio State's, then I don't know what the tiebreaker would be. I think Oregon would get in there because common opponents would be Oregon beating USC. So I think you would need Oregon to win and then lose to Washington. Like there's a path. It's not, you know, exact, but if they like beat Ohio State, I don't know if at 18 you can jump all the way up to number like 10. You know what I mean? Especially with that game being at home. But I mean, there's definitely a path. There's definitely, if you can create enough chaos, a bunch of one-loss teams in the conference sitting there trying to go to the conference championship game. I think that would be really fascinating because Michigan definitely isn't dead. I wouldn't say that they have a lot of life, but definitely not dead yet.
Yeah, I mean that would just be the funniest thing if after this whole year Ohio State is number one basically the entire season and Michigan beats them and then goes to the Big Ten title game. I don't think we would ever hear the end of that one. But I guess just looking at the bracket, Tulane now your G5 team after USF loses last week, so Tulane's in there now. They play Temple this week, and off the top of my head, I don't know who they have next week, but once again, we have a new team in the driver's seat in the G5, but we've had that the past couple weeks with Memphis and USF losing. One of the big kind of points of discussion is, though, Notre Dame being ranked over Alabama. What are your thoughts on that, considering Alabama has maybe the most impressive win over Georgia out of any team in the country this season?
I am shocked that Bama fell all the way to 10. Over the weekend, I was out, in Pittsburgh, and it was me, my brother, my dad, and we're sitting there watching the games. And after Bama lost, my dad was the only one like Bama has to drop far. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think Bama should have dropped as far as they did, but it would be the only thing is with that, it would be tough to drop Notre Dame after Notre Dame throttled the team that the committee just had in their top 25 last week. Like if Pitt was, like a 3-5 ball club and Notre Dame just pounced on them, I don't think, they might have moved Notre Dame down a spot. But I think they were just kind of in a really hard spot, the committee, being that, Notre Dame smoked this Pitt team and Notre Dame's 2 losses, you know, probably the best combo of losses you can have. I know it's not good to be bragging about your losses, but you have a loss to the number 3 team in the country and the number 13 team in the country. Miami was on the road and A&M, was at home. You lost those games by a combined 4 points. Not good that you lost those games, but it's still, you could kind of understand. But the one thing I think that did weigh down Alabama that, we haven't talked about in a while because it was the opening week of the season, but this team did lose to Florida State 31-17.
Yep.
And Florida State has not been good this year. They're 5-5 right now. There's a chance they could. Their last 2 games are at NC State and at Florida. There's a chance this Florida State team can miss a bowl. This is a team that has a loss to Stanford. They lost to this Pitt team that I was just talking about. They have a loss to Miami. You know what I mean? They lost to Virginia. I know those are teams in the top 25, and they just lost to a Clemson team, which is also 5-5. Like that's a really, really bad loss for Alabama. And I think that's what's weighing them down. If Florida State had even just won like 2 more games, even if they weren't a top 25 team, but they were like, oh, okay, they're 6-3. That's not an awful loss opening week of the season. But Florida State has just been so, so bad that it's tough for the committee to kind of Bama is sitting there with that big, big weight on them as you're trying to judge their resume. That's just a terrible loss. And that's the other thing too. It was just such a emphatic loss too. It wasn't like it was close and it was a shootout, and Florida State won in like overtime. No, they won in pretty dominant fashion. And now Bama, you're sitting there. You have some great wins on the schedule. You have that win against Georgia. You have the win against Tennessee in the top 25. At Missouri at the time when they saw their starting quarterback, that's still a good win. Vandy, good win as well. I almost forgot about Vandy sitting there at 14. But that loss to Florida State does kind of weigh them down a little bit. Don't get me wrong. If they went out, I think they're in no problem. But the one thing is I don't see how much higher they're going to climb because Eastern Illinois isn't exactly a world beater. And this Auburn team is 4-6. That's another team that will be fighting just to make a bowl game. They're sitting there at 1-6 in the SEC. They have Mercer this week. But Bama, unless teams ahead of them start to lose, I don't see how high they're going to be able to climb up.
Yeah, and that the Iron Bowl, you never know what's going to happen. Like Bama could definitely be on the outside looking in after that Florida State game, and then pretty much since then they've been pretty dominant for most of the season. It's pretty crazy still, even with the expanded playoff, just what kind of one down week can do to you, potentially kick you out. But like you're looking at that 7-10 matchup right now, like Oregon Alabama, that'd be awesome. You get an Oregon Indiana rematch potentially, or an Indiana Alabama matchup. That would be awesome. The 8-9 game, Notre Dame Oklahoma versus Ohio State. I think that would be a lot of fun. Even 11-6. Well, obviously we got a lot of drama right now with Lane Kiffin in Ole Miss in his situation if he's going to leave. But I think Ole Miss Miami would be great. None of those teams sitting there with that bye, except maybe Georgia, because just of Texas Tech's, I guess, lack of experience at this stage. I'm still not a full-time believer in them because they're in the Big 12 and they exactly haven't played a gauntlet. But like Ohio State's got to be like, really? Notre Dame or Oklahoma? A&M's got to be really? Ole Miss Miami or Oregon Alabama for Indiana? That would set up for great kind of quarterfinals round. But any other comments on the bracket as of right now? It's still pretty fluid. We still got obviously a couple weeks to go, but we got some matchups to discuss for this week as well.
Yeah, the only little thing I'm just finished with, I know, we have Tulane sitting there right now. It does just seem like the committee values the American way more than any other conference. I know JMU's having a great year. They're sitting there with only one loss to Louisville, which Louisville starting to lose these last couple of games is also hurting JMU because that loss doesn't look as good as it did a few weeks ago. Tulane, did have a loss to Ole Miss. I know they have a loss to UTSA, but in terms of that G5 spot, that last spot sitting there, it's going to most likely be the American Conference winner, whether that be Tulane, whether that be North Texas. Navy is still alive for that. That would be cool to see Navy. I think JMU just needs to keep rooting for chaos, and they can just keep winning games. They have a game this week against Washington State. This isn't the Washington State of old. Unfortunately, this isn't, a couple years ago when the Pac-12 still meant something. But, win out if you're JMU, and who knows, maybe you can do enough, and then you're sitting there at 12-1, and you can make a case. But you just got to hope that the American kind of keeps eating itself alive.
All right. Well, that'll do it for playoff talk this week. I'm sure, this time next week we will have a different matchup that caused some chaos and makes us relook at the standings again, and I'll get into it before rivalry week where there's sure to be some upsets. Before we get into the matchups for this week, even just take a look towards the matchups for next week. I mean, you have Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Once again, who knows what's going on with Lane Kiffin? If they were to lose that game, is Ole Miss out? Georgia Tech. I think Georgia is in now. Pretty much no matter what happens over these next 2 weeks. I think if they go 10-2, but then you're like, okay, if Georgia Tech wins next week against Georgia, are they maybe in? If Texas wins this week against Arkansas and beats A&M and some other chaos, is Texas in? You got some big things there. Those games are all on Friday, actually, of next week. And then you got Miami Pitt next rivalry week. That's going to be a big one. USC, what position are they in after this week with Oregon? Rivalry week is set up to obviously be a huge one. Michigan, I think they win out. I think they'll probably get in at 10-2. If Oklahoma trips up one more time, are they out? They got LSU next week. Vandy, Tennessee. Vandy could be playing for a potential play in there. So a lot of chaos to potentially go on still, and I'm sure we'll have at least one or two things to shock us. But we'll stick back to this week, focus on this week and the games at hand. We'll start on Saturday afternoon with Mizzou at 7-3, 3-3 in the SEC. Out of playoff contention, but they have the chance to play spoiler at number 8 Oklahoma, who's 8-2, 4-2, coming off the win of the week at Alabama. Noon kick on ABC. Oklahoma, though, a 9.5-point favorite, over under 42.5.
I'm going to go Oklahoma here, 35-24. So I'll take the Sooners to cover the 9.5. I'm going to go over 42.5. I feel like that number is a little low. I think Oklahoma just proved it, and that's a win. I know I like to talk a lot of times about like letdown spots. I think that's kind of the opposite. I think that's a loss that's going to like rally the team. That's like a season defining, like they joke about it, like Parma and stuff like the start of like the championship DVD. I'm not saying Oklahoma's going to go on a run and win a national title now, but that is a type of win that galvanizes your program. I think they're going to come out and they're going to dominate Missouri. I think they'll cover that 9.5. And I just think Oklahoma's better team coming home too is also a big deal. And I think Oklahoma's just going to kind of be like, okay, it's all out in front of us now. If we just take care of business these last two games, we're going to the playoff. And then, whatever happens, happens. Whatever break, we get in the bracket, we get. But I think Oklahoma's going to come home, win this game. I do not think that they're going to have a letdown spot here against Mizzou. I have them winning this game 35-24, and I think Mizzou's going to kind of score late to make it a little bit closer than the game it will actually be.
Yeah, credit to Oklahoma. I think coming into the year, we talked about it, where they had one of, if not the toughest schedules in the entire country, and they've found a way to navigate it. They've caught some breaks along the way with some of the teams that were highly ranked on the schedule coming into the year, not really living up to the hype, but after that Ole Miss loss, everything kind of looked pretty dull for Oklahoma. I thought we all expected them to drop at least one more game, and most people thought it was last week with that Alabama game, but they found a way to go with that formula that they've had a lot of the year, and it's that defense with Brett Venables. Hats off to him, credit to him for the season he's had and constructed. John Mateer still hasn't been great since his return, but did enough to get a win last week. Like, I think last week was very kind of like going to the NFL, like Philadelphia Eagles, like where, that defense is going to show up, that defense is going to play well. The offense has to do just enough to keep you in the ball game, and they did that, and they found a way to go in and get the biggest win of the season for them. So I'm with you, Joe. I like them to win this week, but I do think Mizzou is a stingy team. I don't think they're a team that, even though they're out of playoff contention, is going to roll over. I know Bo Perbula, too, warmed up last week. I was hearing, obviously didn't play. Zollers played, but it sounds like he's still trying to come back and play, which would be an intriguing situation. Can he be a spoiler for Oklahoma? Definitely have my eyes on this one as one of the potential chaos games, as you said, with Oklahoma coming off that huge win last week. But I do think that they find a way to get it done. 9.5 is a lot, though. I will take Mizzou to cover. I'll go Oklahoma 27-20. Mizzou plus 9.5 over 42.5. All right, we'll go to the Big Ten now. Weird to say that because this is a former like Pac-12 championship type game. But number 15 USC 8-2, 6-1 in the Big Ten. Playing for their life here still at number 7 Oregon, who's 9-1, 6-1. I think if Oregon drops another game, no real good wins on that resume. I think they'd probably be outside the playoff. 3:30 kick on CBS. Oregon 9.5 point favorite, another pretty large favorite here. Over under 60.5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Oregon winning the game. However, I'm just going to take USC to cover. So I'll go Oregon 31, USC 28. So I'll take the Trojans plus the 9.5. I'm going to go under 61.5. I think this is going to be below that number. I think this is going to be, a classic kind of Pac-12 game. I think it's going to be a shootout, but not in the sense of I just think that number's a little high. I think Dante Moore at the end of the day, better quarterback. Oregon, better team. This game being at home is also massive. I've, like I said all season long, I've been really impressed with what Oregon's done. I know their schedule, if you look at it, because Penn State kind of fell apart. That win at Iowa in the rain, in the elements is really impressive. The committee, I don't know if they see it that way. Like if at the end of the day, Iowa's your best win by only 2 points, it's going to be tough to kind of justify making it into the playoff. So I think this is definitely, for both teams, it's a must win. But I think Oregon at home, Dan Lanning is going to have them ready to go. Oregon's going to win this game and put themselves in a spot to be able to get a home playoff game in this year's college football playoff.
Yeah, I want to give some credit to USC just kind of on their season where I think coming from the Pac-12, I was really down on them last year. I thought it would take a couple years to, get into the swing of things in the Big Ten, adjust to that kind of style of play. And I don't think they're fully there yet, but I think they're definitely getting there. Lincoln's got a really nice recruiting class coming in. I think USC is going to be a major player here in the Big Ten for years to come. I think Oregon was kind of over the past few years already building that SEC Big Ten type of roster. USC still had kind of that finesse style. They've gotten a lot tougher this year. They've won some of those games against those tougher opponents like a Nebraska, like a Michigan. So, credit to USC and what they've done, but I think Oregon is just still a little bit better of a team at this stage of the game. I do think USC is going to be able to keep within that number, though. I think these are two desperate teams playing for pretty much their season in this matchup, but I'm going to go with the home team in this one. I don't think Oregon drops 2 this year at home after losing earlier in the year to Indiana. So I'll go Oregon 34, USC 27, USC plus 9.5 over 61.5. All right, we'll go to our G5 game of the week with the number 24 ranked now Tulane Green Wave at 8-2, 5-1 in the American. Travel to Temple, 5-5, 3-3 in the American. Been a stingy team this year. Owls looking to get the bowl eligibility. They've had a handful of opportunities over the last few weeks, and they've came up short. Could really, make this season a special one if they're able to do that. By knocking off Tulane, who as of now would be your college football playoff team out of the G5. So 3:45 kick on ESPNU. Tulane's 8.5-point favorite. Over under is 54.5.
Temple also gets North Texas next week to end the season. They could really be that spoiler team and just totally throw a wrench in everything. And I actually think they're going to be able to start that process this week. I think Temple is going to upset Tulane.
Wow.
I have Temple 28, Tulane 27. This Tulane team, Retzloff, I think he's been very good. I think Tulane is very fortunate that that whole situation kind of happened over at BYU and Retzloff kind of fell into their hands because who knows where they'd be without him right now. But in all honesty, like they haven't, I don't know. I'm just expecting like a Boise State of last year to pop out for this G5 rep, and it's just not happening. I thought USF was going to be that team. That didn't happen. When Memphis beat USF, I'm like, okay, here we go. Memphis is going to go on a run. There's just been so much chaos over and over again. And now, you kind of saw Temple went to UTSA a couple weeks ago and just got demolished. I know Temple is coming off back-to-back losses, but, you kind of have an opportunity, Coyle, like you said. You're 5-5 right now. You win one of these last 2 games, you put yourself into bowl eligibility. This is also a Temple team that's had a pretty solid non-con, playing Oklahoma and Georgia Tech, potentially 2 playoff teams if Georgia Tech, wins out and wins the ACC. But I just think that going on the road, going up to Lincoln Financial, tough. Not in terms of like, oh wow, the fans are going to really be bringing it, but like, you're going to be playing probably in front of a 60% empty stadium in Philadelphia when it's cold and you're a team from New Orleans. I just think this has the recipes to be an upset. Not because I think Temple is ultimately the better football team, but just because Tulane's going to be kind of playing down. This will be a game, you look up from your phone or you're at the bar with your buddies and you all of a sudden see an alert that, Tulane is down 10 points going into the fourth quarter and they need to make a comeback to win the game. So I'm going to go 28-27 Temple. At the very least, I'm taking Temple to cover the 8.5. That's one of my favorite bets of the week. I'll actually spoil it now. That's my dog of the day. I'm going with Temple plus the 8.5. I really like that number. I think the Owls keep it within that 8.5.
Yeah, I think we've seen it too. And sorry if you did mention that, but like all these teams that have been the G5 representative have fallen so far. So it's a situation where like does it happen again? Does a trend continue? And Temple still at this stage of the season, which I don't think anyone expected, playing for a chance to go to a bowl game, and that would be a great kind of way for Casey Keeler to end year 1 at Temple by getting that team to a bowl game after many people predicted they win 2-3 games, potentially the entire season. And it's a situation too where like Casey Keeler has been a coach where you look at his track record and his resume, has won wherever he's gone. Is he a guy that maybe gets plucked by a lower tier Power 4 school after the season? Maybe I could see it, but it's also a guy who's moved around a bunch. Maybe he kind of wants to already in his early 60s kind of finish out his career here. It would be just cool if Temple could have a stable program going to bowl games every year instead of being one of the laughing stocks of college football. I'm not quite there with you that I think that they get it done this week. It would be awesome to find a way to do it. but I do think that they can at least cover the spread. I'm going to go Tulane 33-27, Temple plus 8.5, over 54.5. I think Retzlaff just a little bit too much, and I could see this one just being really close down to the wire, but Tulane is top to bottom just a better ball club, and they find a way to get this one done. So I think this one's a close one. I think this one's a fun one, but I do like Tulane to win. But I will take the Owls to cover at plus 8.5 and over 54.5. All right, we go to the Big 12 now. K-State, 5-5, 4-3 in the Big 12. One of the more disappointing teams. I had them actually in my playoff, I think, as 11-2 after losing in the Big 12 championship going into the year, and here we are. They're just fighting for a bowl game. They go to number 12 Utah, one of the tougher places in the country to play. 8-2, 5-2 in the Big 12. Utah, who knows, could still find their way into the college football playoffs, so no room to slip up. 4:00 kick on ESPN2. Utah 17.5 point favorite. Over under there is 52.5.
I think Utah's going to take care of business in this game. I have them winning 42-28. So I'll take K-State to cover 7.5. That's a big number. I know Utah has just been demolishing teams lately. Don't get me wrong. And I'm going to go with the over 52.5. I think Kansas State will be able to keep it within that number. But Coyle, you were kind of saying that Utah just needs to keep winning. That's all you can do, because it stinks too, especially because they're sitting here at 12. Like, if you were doing a legit 1-12 playoff, they're the last team in right now. How the auto bid system works, that's just not how it's going. And all you can do at this point, because once again, they're another team. We were kind of talking about it earlier with Oregon, except they're kind of to more of an extreme. In their wins, they have dominated. Their closest win, I believe, is 31-6 at Wyoming. Every other game has been just pure domination. 3 in a row. They would beat Colorado 53-7, Cincinnati 45-14, and at Baylor 55-28. But they have 2 losses to Texas Tech and BYU, the other 2 best teams in the conference, the 2 teams ranked ahead of them. All you can do is win these last 2 against both Kansas State and Kansas. Hope there's a little bit of chaos in front of you, and that pushes you in to the playoff and gets you on the right side of that bubble. And I think Utah knows that. And I think they've been playing like that. I think that loss to BYU was a little bit of a wake-up call, and they've been playing pissed off ever since. So I'm going to go with Utah here winning. I don't think they'll cover, but I think they'll win by at least 2 scores.
And also to just go back to the Temple Tulane game as well. I saw earlier, Summerall was complaining about his team, saying they just practiced. They were average. He doesn't think that they're a top 25 team. And he's one of the main rumored guys to be going to Auburn. So maybe he's a guy with 1 foot out the door already too. And they could potentially slip up there, and Temple has a chance for the upset. But back to this Utah game, betting against Utah is never a good recipe to do when it's at Utah. More likely when it's at night, though. And 17 has a lot of points. Utah has had a few games this year where they have taken care of business and blown out some teams, but 17.5 is a lot. I still think this Kansas State team can be stingy on a good day. I think that they've definitely disappointed this year. Haven't lived up to the hype. My Avery Johnson stock is probably as low as it's got. Maybe he comes back for 1 more year to K-State, or he transfers somewhere else and finds a different place that to play his last year of college football. He actually might have 1 more year after this year, but it's been a disappointing ride for Kansas State. I think they're not in full quit mode. I think they're still kind of playing tough and stingy. But I do like Utah at the end of the day just to find a way to get this done. It doesn't matter if it's by 10. It doesn't matter if it's by 2. It doesn't matter if it's by 30. As long as Utah wins this game, they keep themselves alive for another week, and that's all they can ask for at this stage of the season. So I think they win, but I will take K-State to cover. I'll go 31-17. So K-State plus 17.5, under 52.5. All right, 2 games to go. We go to the ACC. Pitt at 7-3, 5-1 in the ACC. Coming off a beatdown from Notre Dame. They'll play number 16, Georgia Tech, 9-1, 6-1. 7 o'clock kick on ESPN. Georgia Tech minus 2.5, over under 62.5. And Joe, if Georgia Tech wins this week, if they win next week against Georgia at 11-1, I believe they would I'm not going to say 100%, but I believe if they just win this game, they're in the ACC title game.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess even if they were to lose that ACC title game, if they go 11-2 with that win over Georgia, do you think that there's still a chance they could get in, or do you think they just have to win the ACC at the end of the day?
I think if they were to win out, you'd be looking at like an SMU situation last year where it'll be tough to throw them out for another team that either A, didn't play in the conference title game, or B, did, but like lost close. And you have the whole thing. Because if you beat Georgia, who's number 4 in the country right now, and who knows, could move up over these next couple of weeks as well. But if you're Georgia Tech, because right now you're sitting there, you're at 16. That one loss to NC State, that's a bad loss. They barely beat Boston College. That was my lock of the week. That was very shocking to me. That was a game, I had on my phone when we were out at the bar the whole time. And I was just like, how is Georgia Tech not dominating this football team? That's a bad Boston College team. And Georgia Tech's had a couple of these games this year, like where they should have lost to Wake Forest. They obviously didn't. Clemson, they win by a field goal. Clemson hasn't looked that good this year. They really haven't been dominating teams, which I don't know. I expect them to kind of flip a switch. Maybe that's just, the way they're playing, and, you win games ugly, but a win is a win. I think they're going to do that again. I think they're going to win 35-31. I'm going to take a minus of 2.5, even though I don't like Georgia Tech really being favored right now against anyone with how they're playing. I think this is a Pitt team that still has everything to play for, as not being talked about enough. Pitt is sitting there at 5-1. I almost wonder now, if you're like a JMU or a G5 type, you hope chaos breaks out and like you get Pitt and SMU, who are 7-3, somehow getting in to the conference title game, and then you're deciding between one of those two teams, JMU and Tulane or North Texas, and maybe who knows, the committee doesn't get those teams across the finish line. That being said, though, I think Georgia Tech, this game being at home, I think their fans are going to come out. This is going to be a massive game. This is 7 o'clock prime time game. You're going up against the Florida Tennessee game, which, although it's a big rivalry, Florida down year. And then on NBC, you have Nebraska, Penn State. Big fan bases, but games that really, unless even Tennessee sitting there at 20, like not really do or die games. This is a pretty big game. You have a lot of eyes on you as a program. You have an opportunity to go out, get a win, put yourself in a position where you're locked into the ACC championship game, good or bad, against Georgia. Go out, win this game. I think they will. And then, who knows what'll happen over the next week for that, who they'll play in the conference title game.
I like Georgia Tech to win this one. I'll take them to cover 2, but I do think this game's going to be a war. Pure comes down to the last possession. Georgia Tech walks it off with a field goal. Haynes King has a 4th down, rush from the 3-yard line to win it. Something like that down the stretch where it's just a hectic game down to the wire. Pitt gives it everything they have. Georgia Tech gives it everything they have. I think we get one of the better games of the college football season. Georgia Tech, I think you touched on it best, Joe, where it's like they don't look great all the time, but they know how to flip the switch and win the game down the stretch when it matters most. Pitt, we talked about it going into last week. How serious were they really taking that matchup? How much did they really want to show? I think they were saving kind of their fastball, everything that they could for this week, and then they got Miami next week, right?
Yes.
Yeah, to finish out the season. So, Pitt has 2 huge opportunities here to punch their ticket to the ACC title game. But I'm going to go with Georgia Tech to win. I think this is a team that is the best team, the stingiest team, the toughest team in the ACC. I think if I just find a way to get it done, it's not going to be pretty, but I like them to win. I'll go 30-27. Georgia Tech minus 2.5, under 62.5. And Georgia Tech finds their way to the ACC title game. And I truly think that they're the best team. Miami might be the most talented, but they still have their fair share of flaws and their fair share of blunders throughout the year. Where if Georgia Tech, they're playing them on a neutral field, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Georgia Tech finds their way to the college football playoff. So give me the Yellow Jackets minus 2.5, under 62.5. And final game, we will go to the Big 12 with number 11 BYU at 9-1, 6-1 in the conference. They go to Cincinnati, who's been a pretty pleasant surprise this season, going 7-3, 5-2 in the conference. 8:00 kick on Fox. BYU is a 1.5-point favorite. Over under is 54.5. Joe, and BYU, still in the mix for sure in their own right. most likely, if they win out here, going to have a rematch and face Texas Tech in that Big 12 title game with the berth on the line.
Yeah, this is obviously, BYU needs to win this football game. You put yourself, and at Cincinnati, a 7-3 team, not a bad win. Cincinnati was in the top 25 last week. They got knocked off by Arizona. But this is and your next two wins, you have this one and then you're home against UCF. UCF's not going to move the needle in any way, shape, or form. BYU, if you go out and win this game, especially convincingly, who knows every single point, bonus points that you can get to try and impress the committee at this point is going to help you, considering the fact that you are that first team out on that cut line because of the auto bids. You're sitting there. However, I think that Cincinnati is going to pull off this upset here, 27-24. I'm going to go Cincy plus the 1.5. I'm going to go with the under 54.5. I feel like, if you're going to pick the home dog here, you're going to need to win a little bit more low scoring. Sorsby for Cincinnati is a very good quarterback. Like, I'm not taking anything away from BYU. Bear Bachmeier has been, very good this year. BYU has been really good this year. But that being said, I just think Cincinnati at home, BYU, you're going across the country. We've talked about it 1,000 times. I know Utah to Cincinnati isn't as bad as like California to Maryland, but still a pretty far ways away. Primetime game. Cincinnati, you win this game. I don't think they're dead for a Big 12 title berth yet. Because if BYU were to lose and Cincinnati wins, you have a big bosh. It would be BYU, Utah, Houston, Arizona State, and Cincinnati, all with 2 losses in the conference. I have no clue how the tiebreakers would break out there. But, if you're Cincinnati, you're very much still alive for not only a conference title appearance, but you run the table and you somehow upset Texas Tech, you're probably going to the playoff. So Cincinnati is still alive. Coming off of a tough loss against Arizona. I know their last game before that was a big loss at Utah as well. But I just think this is, back against the wall, do or die spot. At the very least, I think I'm going to take Cincinnati first half money line just to, see what value I can get there. Ultimately, I think Cincinnati will pull off this upset, though. Like I said, not really sure against BYU. This is just a really tough spot.
Yeah, I'm going with Cincinnati too. So that poses the question, Joe. If Cincinnati beats BYU, is the title game still Utah, or is it still BYU versus Texas Tech? Because BYU has the head-to-head win over Utah, or are we still is Houston jump them because Houston plays TCU this week and Baylor, and their other losses West Virginia and Texas Tech, so they would only have not the Texas Tech. Do you know off the top of your head the chaos scenario? Because Cincinnati's still at 5-2, Arizona State still at 5-2. Are all those teams technically still alive?
Yeah, all those teams. That's what I was kind of saying before. BYU, if they lose, it'd be BYU, Utah, Houston, Arizona State, Cincinnati, all with 2 conference losses. I have no clue how they would sort through that. I I have really do have no clue how that would happen. Um, but then you'd be sitting there at a point, like I said, Cincinnati still very much alive. All these teams, even Houston. I know we didn't talk about Houston today. Houston is still alive, which is crazy because I think they obviously lost after they were ranked. West Virginia beat them and knocked them out. But Houston, didn't they slide? Yeah, they slid back in today at 23.
Yeah.
Probably the quietest, like, power conference top 25 team that we have this year. Sitting there, with only 2, that West Virginia loss is just so bad. That's just such a gross loss at home to a West Virginia team that is just not having a very good year. I know it's year 1 under Rich Rod, in his second stint there, but there's a whole lot that could happen. And obviously, don't get me wrong, if you're Texas Tech, you're probably rooting just for BYU to win out. That way, if you win that game again, you put yourself in a spot of like, hey, we might be able to get a bye. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's so much that can happen in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think we talked about at the beginning of the season the conference of chaos, and it really is doing it coming down to the stretch here. BYU wins this game. They definitely put themselves in the driver's seat for that rematch. With UCF next week at home, you have to figure they're at least a double-digit favorite in that one too. So, but for the sake of the Conference of Chaos, I'm going to go with Cincinnati too. I'll take them to win. They're coming off 2 straight losses in the Big 12 where I think the game could have gone, arguably either way, and they're probably kicking themselves because they would have been in the driver's seat if they just had split those games at Utah, that game was blowout last week versus Arizona. That game could have gone either way, and that was a home game too. They don't bounce back after the Utah game. Puts them in a tough spot here where they need to win out and they need some chaos. If they had just won last week, they would have been in the driver's seat, at least controlling their own destiny. But that's the way it goes sometimes. But I do think that they find a way to get this one done at home. BYU, we saw it last year, won a bunch of games at the beginning of the season by pulling a rabbit out of their hat and have some late fourth quarter magic down the stretch. But then we saw kind of down the season that magic started to dwindle a bit, and I think we might see that a little bit down the stretch this year as well. I'm going to go Cincinnati to win, beat BYU, and then have a real major chaos situation next week going into rivalry week in the Big 12. All right, that'll wrap it up for our games of the week. We'll wrap it up with our dog of the day and our lock of the week. Dog of the day, favorite underdog. I will go with Kentucky plus 9.5 at Vandy. They're in a situation similar to Temple that we talked about where no one was expecting anything of Kentucky football this year. I think everyone was expecting 2 to 3 wins. Stoops probably gets fired, and that situation's all over. But here they are sitting at 5-5, 1 game away from bowl eligibility. And Vandy next week has the Tennessee game. I think that's a clear kind of look-ahead spot, even though Vandy needs to win both of their games to have any chance to go to the college football playoff. If they win next week and win this week, I think it's going to be a tough task to keep them out. But it's still a perfect kind of look-ahead spot here with Kentucky plus 9.5, who's been playing better football down the stretch. I know last week was a FCS team, but to keep it within 10 points, I think that they're capable of doing that with Vandy in the look-ahead spot here. So Kentucky plus 9.5 at Vanderbilt for my dog this week.
Yeah, Coyle. It's funny you mentioned that because you had Pavia was at the UFC fights over the weekend. That's kind of like, I know he's obviously older for a college quarterback, and at the end of the day, these kids do like whatever they want, but it's kind of crazy you have a college quarterback in the middle of a potential playoff run. I know it was a bye week, but it's almost treating it like it's an NFL bye week where you're going, he's showing up at the UFC fight. You have this Kentucky team who very funnily almost lost to Toledo to open up the season. Now sitting here, winning 3 in a row. I didn't even realize they beat Florida 38-7. That's insane. Kentucky fighting for a bowl spot. That's going to be a really interesting game. I think Vandy's going to win, but I'm with you. 9.5 might be a little bit too many points, especially with, you got Pavia going on UFC fights. How locked in are you to make a playoff spot? Obviously, I already said Temple 8.5 was my dog. I spoiled that when we went over the game. So I'll start with my lock of the week. I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going with North Texas Rice over 55.5. I am ice cold. I was 8-2. I've lost 3 in a row. It's not been going well. That being said, North Texas loves to score points. I just had it up. I got to find it again. They're scoring at least 42 points a game. They've been really, really impressive. I know in that loss to USF, they scored only 36. But this is a team at 9-1 here who has just been dominant in these games. UAB last week to beat 53-24. Navy, the triple option, so I lied. They didn't have 50. They had 31 there. But then Charlotte, 54 points. UTSA, 55 points. They score a lot. They score often. I think they will be able to have, a majority, they'll be able to carry the brunt of that total, 55.5. I think they can get me at least 42. So you're telling me all Rice needs to do is score 14 points. I think that they'll be able to do that. So I'm going with over 55.5 in the North Texas Rice game.
Let's get a win there, Joey. I'm going with the over 2. You were kind of touched on the game. Doesn't have as much aura as it usually does with Florida having a down year. But I'll go Tennessee, Florida over 57.5. Tennessee still one of the highest powered offenses in the country. And Florida's offense against a pretty good Ole Miss defense last week showed some life. This one's over 57.5. I think if Tennessee can do their usual 35 points or so, I think Florida is capable of putting up, a 20 3 points, something in that mix to get you the over. But Florida too is a team in quit mode. Tennessee could go out there in a rivalry game too and completely put it on them for 45. Florida only needs 2 touchdowns then to get the over. Taking a Tennessee over is something that I would never complain about. So Tennessee, Florida over 57.5 for my lock of the week there. But that'll do it for this week. Gonna go upstairs and watch the rest of Duke and Kansas. Not sure what's going on there, but college basketball season really starting to get into full swing as well. But thank you everyone for tuning in. As always, please like, please subscribe, and we'll talk next week.